Hello again, class. This week, I'm delving further into the study of American Red Feminism. One of Liberty's biblical worldview principles is central to this study, which has been constantly obscured by the dialectic over time. And it says the historian must be dedicated to a reasoned and investigated reconstruction of primary sources. My fascination with the subject is one of curiosity, and it's not my goal to make a point, but to uncover the truth. This week we looked at the America History and Life database, where I found a good selection of options through an easy Boolean search. The first article I want to talk about is a social or popular culture approach to the subject, Ian Afflerbach's Cocktails or Communism, Vanity Fair's Belated Women of the 1930s. Afflerbach examines the magazine Vanity Fair and its left-leaning contributors in the 1930s. As for sources, Afflerbach mainly relies on primary sources being Vanity Fair articles. He also uses Keyser's Playing Smart, New York Women Writers and Modern Magazine Culture, and some of her other works. In terms of methodology, an examination of Tess Schlesinger's writings is the core of it, and it puts them both in context and evaluates the content, as well as the people that she was involved with writing. And overall, it demonstrates how leftist and communist themes penetrate the feminism demonstrated in Schlesinger's work. Some of them are instructive pieces, but some are just commentary. So it might be How to Throw a Cocktail Party, which is tinged with some of this more political radicalism. The remaining works I looked at this week are all very much related to Kate Weigand's Red Feminism, which is a hallmark for the entire subject. It's the canonical source that underlines most related research on the topic. In her The Red Taboo in American Women's History, on Not Seeing Revolutionary Russia, Julia Mickenberg addresses the historiography of red women and feminism in the writing of America's communist history. In this work, she relies on mainly secondary sources. It's a historiography piece. And so she addresses Red Feminism by Weigand, Secret History of American Communism by Harvey Clare, another sort of canonical work, Haunted Wood, on espionage, Soviet espionage in America, and Doubled Lives, which is one of the same, which I read in junior high. Russia in the American Feminist Imagination is the name of her book manuscript, and she also talks a lot about her efforts. She talks about how the red diaper babies, the kids who were raised by left-leaning parents, offer a more sympathetic approach to communist historiography, and that would fall into the sort of revisionist approach in the wider historiography of communism. And she talks about how that revisionist approach, she says actually, quote, "Without a sympathetic, open-minded effort to understand the deep emotional longings that drew women to Soviet Russia, we cannot comprehend the factors that both helped create and are obscured by the Red Taboo in U.S. women's history." So she goes from suffrage and its links to Bolshevism all the way through the post-war period, and talks about how women have been demonized by linking them to Bolshevism. In fact, a lot of people weren't actually communists, but were drawn to the sort of utopian ideas of women's role in Soviet Russia. Whether or not that turned out is a different topic, and it really didn't. But the idea that they could have more rights and more of an autonomous life was appealing to a lot of women and sparked a lot of second wave feminism. Although we only had to look at 3 articles, my last conversation here is going to be about 3 different articles that are all kind of reviews or reflections or some kind of commentary about Weigand's Red Feminism. They all come up as independent articles, not as reviews, like categorically in the journals, and so I've included them here. I think that they offer a really interesting historical lens into the historiography of women in American communism, and that's why we're going to look at them here. There's Precursors and Bridges by Rosalind Baxendale, who's a core writer in communist history. Red Feminism, A Personal and Historical Reflection by Bettina Apteker, and Gerald Horne's The Reddening of the Woman. In the 3 different sort of reviews or commentaries on Red Feminism, the authors refer to primary sources, archival data that is used both in Weigand's book and from their own experience. They also pay a lot of attention to their own personal experience, particularly Apteker, who was involved with the party, and then they use Weigand's work extensively. As for methodology, it's a review essentially, but they center on historiography, and they compare the primary sources to Weigand's evaluation, applauding the quality of her work. But they also take a look at this like change in continuity concept in history to see how this conversation has evolved over time. Most of them make recommendations. Baxendale applauds her, saying that Red Feminism rescues an important group of communist women from the dustbin of Cold War history. She applies a feminist theory kind of lens to it. Apteker, who was involved with the party, also applauded the archival work, but she said that differed from her own experience and said that the work would have benefited from interviews. I think that that's a good place for me to think about working, is interviewing people who were involved in that movement. And the last piece by Horn, he really talks about how she's had to strike a balance in this dialectic fight between conservative traditionalist views and more progressive revisionist views. And overall, they just reaffirm this need for the continued research of women in the party.